What will determine if we get more Dune movies than just the Dune movies which have already been filmed? Because I believe that uh, Villeneuve's or Denis, I believe he's filmed both movies. I think that's the idea. I could be wrong, but essentially, I think they're breaking Dune, the novel, into two movies. So I think we're getting at least two, and like if we're lucky, hopefully it's not something where we only get half the novel turned into one movie. That would be upsetting. Not the worst thing that's ever happened, of course, but it would be upsetting to a lot of people. So the initial box office will be a factor, like whatever it takes in, and I think sustained weekly success, right? Versus its action high concept competition, and then zeitgeist infiltration, for lack of a better term. Are people talking about it when it comes out? Like more so even than are the reviews good? Is it generating clickbaity think pieces? And is it generating YouTube content, for example? And I don't know much about these things. I don't know much about Hollywood numbers. And I'm wondering, will the bar be lower because of quarantine? Certainly, it's a big question about movies like Tenet. Will Tenet save Hollywood? Everyone's holding their breath about people in Hollywood about what's going to happen when that movie comes out. Will it perform anywhere similar to what it would have done were we not in the Mar-a-Lago virus pandemic quarantine, which I guess the quarantine is kind of over in a sense, but or it will be certainly by the time Dune comes out, hopefully, but it's going to affect everything. Think about how record sales peaked with some albums selling 2 million in a week 20 years ago maybe, and now nothing sniffs that. Understandably, media is consumed in different ways. The expectations for movies the Marvel movies are still through the roof, but a lot of that is people going to see the movies. Of course, there's a lot of enthusiasm for them. Some of that's inflation, right? And also just people going to see these movies in special formats like IMAX, for example. And maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe these statistics are always adjusted for inflation. But there's a lot of competition for the act of going to the cinema, right? There's so much content on the internet. What if Dune becomes the highest grossing film of the year? That is a scenario. And I wish it didn't seem so far off. When I say it sounds sort of ridiculous. Maybe people are talking about this possibility, but I don't know that they are. I think that there's a chance. Then Denis could make, if that happened, Denis could make as many as he wanted, probably. But would Denis having that kind of control be a good thing? I think that's a good, legitimate question. Certainly, the Lord of the Rings movies were great, partially because there was that singular vision behind them. But personally, I've never been into the Hobbit movies. I didn't really watch them. I've seen parts of them, and the set pieces are a little much for me. Maybe a lot much is more the term. They're a little over the top, and just I don't have a huge computer graphics tolerance. I think that there is certainly a place for them, but when you have a whole set piece which is just it looks like a video game to me, I kind of just zone out. Which isn't to say I don't like blockbusters, contemporary blockbusters. I do, but like the script needs to be great, like the acting needs to be great, the music needs to be great. Like these set pieces like don't do a lot for me. Maybe because I grew, you know, like I'm 31, but I grew up watching movies that had practical effects, and so I was very aware of like when that sort of shift happened. That being said, like I also like the movie Avatar, you know, James Cameron's movie, which is essentially like one long CGI movie, you know. So, but because I think, you know, the script isn't amazing, but I think James Cameron is a great director. Like I think the acting is pretty good, and I think that there was like a sort of unique vision behind. Like I think it looks great, like on a nice TV. Like I think Avatar looks awesome. Regarding the Hobbit movies, though, like I wanted Guillermo del Toro to make them, to make his. They were saying it would be like a Hobbit duology, right? Because Guillermo del Toro has a vision. He has tone, something that I'm not sure that Peter Jackson even has. Like aside from a general, you know, him having like a general like Spielberg imitation, Ron Howard type, generic Hollywood tone. I know that Peter Jackson is a Kiwi. I'm not, you know, saying he's from Hollywood, but he certainly works in Hollywood now. If Del Toro had tackled The Hobbit, it would have been like the most talented director to take on a genre film since Alfonso Cuarón did Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the best Harry Potter movie, and you know, in my opinion, it's also one of the best books. So I also like a couple of the later books a lot. Now I don't know how to evaluate Denis. I really liked Arrival. I didn't particularly like Blade Runner 2049. Like besides the reveal at the end and the scenery of Vegas, you know, like I didn't think it was awful. I thought it was like a bit of a slow burn, and you know, and I like Ryan Gosling as an actor. I think he's pretty good. I just don't know whether I'm convinced. Like, and that's probably my fault. I need to watch more Denis movies, and I certainly should before Dune comes out. I just don't know whether I'm convinced so far, to use a Dune term, that Denis has voice. Also, I think his involvement will mean he takes the safe path when big creative decisions come up. And maybe this is unfair, but because Blade Runner was kind of a flop, I think it cost a lot of money. It didn't really make that much back. But if he botches Dune somehow, and I don't think he will, but if he does, he'll likely never get a movie with this big of a budget, like again, right? And I don't know the rules of Hollywood. Like, certainly Guy Ritchie has had very successful movies, and then he's had some movies which are considered flops, and yet he still gets very big budget movies. So I don't know, like that would necessarily be true, that his career is like hinging on this. Like I don't think it really is. And you know, maybe that thing about the safe path was unfair because, as I understand it, he spent like a year just on the, not just, but he spent a year making sure that the design for Shai Hulud was up to his high standards. This was like a quotation that I read from Denis. So, you know, like that is a good sign to me, of course. Like, that's a cool idea. You know, certainly the design of Shai Hulud is going to be very important to the whole visual aesthetic of the movie. Maybe not even this movie, but the next one especially. So we're getting 2 movies. That means that Dune has to be like it big, meaning it, the Stephen King adaptation, which you know, happened like 2 years ago or whatever it was. Then I find it hard to imagine that they would greenlight Dune Messiah, without also having maybe children ready to go. Maybe that's just because I relatively recently watched the Sci-Fi Channel children miniseries, which puts them together. But Messiah by itself doesn't feel like a full plot. There's a lot going on in it, and if you tonally played it right, you would, you could make a great film out of it. I just don't know that people who are not interested in the books would find it to be like a whole coherent plot on its own. Like, it's sort of like rests on a cliffhanger, and maybe that's not totally fair. Like, there are things that are resolved, but it certainly has that kind of like end of Empire Strikes Back like ending where you're like if they made Dune Messiah into a film without also like committing to making children, it would have like a pretty awkward ending, I think. Like, maybe awkward's not the right word. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I really like the ending of Dune Messiah. I just love that book in general. I think there's a lot. Like, I found it almost like life-changing in a sense. Like, there's a lot of like philosophy to it. Like, I know that Dune is considered very philosophical, and of course, like God Emperor would be considered philosophical, but I think there's a lot of philosophy in Dune Messiah, like that it's underrated from that perspective. So talking about it, they like it when it came out was huge, right? It like exceeded expectations. Like, I didn't care for the movie. The smash cuts, which is like a term I just learned, but like really, like the editing I didn't care for. Like, I thought visually, like it looked pretty cool. Like the color palette was kind of amazing, like the scenery, and I thought that the acting was good too. But like it looked more like a long music video than like a movie to me, and like I didn't see the second one yet, so maybe it's not fair for me to make any kind of qualifications about the whole thing. And I'm looking forward to watching the second one at some point, because I do really like Bill Hader, like, and always have. But like, yeah, going back to Children of Dune, like going back to Messiah and Children sort of as a long story, if you're going to see them like that, because together they're about like the length of Dune, right? There's like a darkness in those two sequel novels that isn't in Dune in a sense. Like, it takes a dark turn. Aaliyah's abomination status would probably be like, that's kind of darker than almost anything that you see in Dune. Like, of course, people in Dune die. Important characters die. Like, and I'm bad with like spoilers. I mean, obviously you shouldn't really watch this channel, like, if you're afraid of Dune spoilers at all. This is for like the Dune initiated. I know that's pompous. I'm sorry. But like the drug trances in the Dune sequels, and there are drug trances in Dune as well, but they're like a major component of the sequel books, like, because they, I think, as they are in Dune, I guess, but they cause things to happen. They're not necessarily like gone into with consent in the sequel novels. Like, some people get drugged, so there's that aspect to it. Like, that's a very dark thing, and Denis has obviously been shown to be capable of tackling dark subjects with Arrival, for instance. But like, I would love to see someone who's really interested in making those sequel novels of Dune into movies that are almost horror movies, maybe, like, for or at least that are willing to mix that in, whether we're talking about like the editing, whether we're talking about like, I'm not talking about jump scares necessarily, but the music, like. So keeping that in mind, keep in mind that I'm no cinephile or film expert by any means, I'm going to offer up some like theoretical home run directing choices for the Dune sequels. If the studios decide for whatever reason that they don't want Denis back, or if Denis decides that he doesn't want to come back, or if it's a number of years from now before they make the other movies, things like that can happen, right? So these are just like, I'm kind of throwing things against the wall. I'm sure that you guys have as good or better suggestions to mine that and I don't I don't follow cinema very closely. These are just some names that I know and some people that I'm interested in. And like my thing with movies, I'd like to say, like I love action movies, like I love popcorn movies, but I also really am interested in like tightly written scripts, and I'm interested in like good acting and like good editing and music, the way everything comes together. Like I'm not so much interested to go back to the Harry Potter movies or to go back to that first It movie, and now that I've read It, unfortunately, but like I'm not really interested in movies that for which you've had to read the book to understand them, which I feel like the Harry Potter books are kind of like that. But I would rather that things get cut out for the sake of like a good film ultimately, or that things get changed for the sake of making it a good like coherent film. Because the worst thing is like they had to, with David Lynch's movie, they had to like hand out like cliff notes or something, right, when people walked it. I think that's the case, right? Like, and of course like that movie is not good, unfortunately. It's fun to watch like from a certain perspective, but we have high hopes for these Denis movies. Okay, so the first name I'm going to throw out there for potential Dune sequel directors, Greta Gerwig. She's critically lauded, interested in human emotion, has shown a willingness to adapt a popular, well-loved story. Already previously adapted Little Women, which I haven't seen, but I hear is good. Maybe she wouldn't be into this, but maybe she'd be the cool It woman to make that bold stunt, to make bold stunt casting moves, like letting like Grimes or Poppy play Aaliyah or something. It sounds sort of ridiculous like that, but which could end up being a home run or something. Messiah and Children are when we see a woman voice come to the forefront, besides Jessica's, though of course Jessica is very important to those stories as well. But I'm sure that there's other talented women directors out there, some of whom who have done high concept genre films, of whom I'm not aware, and I'd love to hear about them, so let me know. I'm not familiar with Ava DuVernay's work, unfortunately, so I don't want to comment on her. Second name that I'll throw out there is Robert Eggers. And I know that Eggers and Ari Aster are, for good reason, always going to be linked together. And I enjoyed Hereditary and Midsommar just as much as I did The Witch and The Lighthouse. Though they are far from typical Hollywood horror films. And again, I'm no horror or thriller movie expert. But though they're far from being typical Hollywood horror films, I think Aster's two most recent features are still more traditional horror films than are The Witch or The Lighthouse. So Eggers' films are maybe what you'd consider like art house horror, with a lot of allegory and like intimate scenes. And they're understated in some aspects, which I think is like kind of an exciting thing to have in like a Hollywood genre film, a potential blockbuster. I'd like to see the horror aspects of Messiah and Children like embraced fully. I'm not even sure that Messiah and Children are potentially even action movies. Like there's I'm trying to think of like what action scenes there are, and there's like only like I don't know, there's only like one or two that I can really think of in those two books, like things that you could turn into like set pieces. Like unlike the slower Harry Potter movies, there are no Quidditch matches like in the later Dune novels. Like no guaranteed set pieces to break up the densely plotted scheming and the palace intrigue. And like after I already wrote this script for this video, like I saw the coming attraction for the movie The Green Knight, and like that looks awesome. Like I don't know anything about that director and his previous work. I think it's a man, but I was like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Like it looked really dark. Like I don't know if it's meant to be like a horror film. I don't think it necessarily is. I think it's meant to be like a fantasy movie, but like it looked like, you know, like looked like the music is really cool, and like, you know, it looked grimdark, but like grimdark in the sense of like maybe an art house horror movie, not grimdark like, you know, Steve Minichin's DC Batman movies. You know, and I have no idea that Eggers would want to do something like this, you know, make the jump to like big Hollywood adaptation. But if he would, like Dune has to be an intriguing property. It has, you know, themes like provincialism, mythology, psychological horror, drug abuse, betrayal, you know, steampunk and cyberpunk iconography. And I brought up Harry Potter because what I explicitly don't want to see is, you know, like I said, these Dune movies just becoming like something that are like storyboarded directly off the books and like feel like, you know, that they're more Hollywood than you know, than they are film. And I know that's pretentious, but Dune is pretentious, right? And like I think that everyone kind of knows that. And we have like a, you know, yeah, I already drank this, but I wanted to show you guys this beer that I found. You know, a tip out there to like all the brewers and stuff, or I don't know, people that are into like craft beer is very nerdy, right? People that are into nerdy things in general who are trying to like sell their small business. Anything, if you make like subtle Dune illusions or like put Dune Easter eggs into your properties, whether it's your beer or whatever, or like your stuff that you sell on, you know, what's that website where people sell their crafts? I don't know, but like putting Dune Easter eggs and things will like attract people to buy them. People like me. I remember I was like bartending at like a beer bar a couple years ago, and this Canadian brewer comes in and he's like, we're talking about his like his beers that he puts out, and he was like, yeah, I put out this like beer with like a Star Trek reference in the name. And I was like, oh dope, like I love Star Trek. And he was like, yeah, actually, he was like, I don't really care about Star Trek. I just know that like these nerdy Canadians will like buy anything if I like make a reference to Star Trek. And I just thought it was really funny. Like I know not all Canadians are into Star Trek, but I know there are a lot. But Dune fans are like that, you know, and it's like almost like an untapped thing. And I don't even know that that this is, I think they're talking about the Dunes in Jersey, like with this Carton beer. But shout out to Carton, of course, because their beer is awesome, and I did really enjoy that beer. So yeah, I mean, I think it would be like the worst thing if like a serviceable director like cranked out 6 Dune films and they were like felt very rote and and you know, like someone like you know, and I don't know, this is kind of mean to David Yates, but like, you know, they just have this guy like making all the Harry Potter movies, and like from what I've seen, like it's not because he's like so great at directing. He's just willing to tackle these big kind of things and like take the guff that comes with doing this. But I don't want to see like 6 Dune movies, you know, from just like a very serviceable director who's not willing to push back at like Hollywood execs about his or her vision. You know, Dune raises the question, like, what must we do to create true novelty in the universe? What difficult choices and creative risks must we face in order to achieve that? So, like, in a sense, this is, you know, the text asks these questions, which, you know, making an adaptation of it should answer by, you know, by the action of creating them, in a sense, if you want to stay with the spirit of the source material. Okay. Third name I'm going to throw out there, the great Jordan Peele. Regardless of how you feel about Lead Kynes being played by Shannon Duncan Brewster, you have to admit that with her as the kid's grandmother and Zendaya as their mother, Leda the Second can't really be played by someone who looks like James McAvoy in this universe. Though he did, James McAvoy did a great job in the Sci-Fi Channel series, and I think he's a great actor. And I think it's also very cool to have, the God Emperor played by someone who also ended up then playing Professor X. Like, it's just a cool tie-in. But what I'm saying is that we're gonna get a black God Emperor, and obviously I think Quinn from Quinn's Ideas should play Leda the Second. Shout out to Quinn. That he should play Leda the Second as an adult. But more importantly, like, who should direct these movies? And Jordan Peele is amazing. Get Out is one of the best movies of the past 10 years. And I also enjoyed Us. He's a nerd, as exhibited by Key and Peele skits, such as the Gremlins 2 skit. And when I was 5, my favorite movie was The Gremlins. It ain't got shit to do with this, but I just thought that I should mention. And Jordan Peele's a sci-fi enthusiast on some level, having resurrected the Twilight Zone, which I haven't seen his Twilight Zones, so I can't comment on them. But he definitely once asked Disney if he could reboot Gargoyles. And while I hope he still does that, I think he would be a home run to do the 3rd and 4th Dune movies, or however many he would want to do, precisely because he understands suspense, violence, and editing better than almost anyone working today. The editing thing, I think, because he spent so much time making that sketch comedy, and like, editing is everything in filmed sketch comedy. So yeah, like I said, I didn't like that first It movie because of the editing. Like, I thought whatever smash edits, like, I only learned that term very recently, but I think that's the thing that bothers me. Like, there's no real suspense in that It movie because every time it's like, oh, there's a kid, he's in a situation by himself or herself. Is a demonic clown going to pop up in the next 25 seconds? Yes, it did. Look at that. There's no room to breathe for these scenes, and so no real suspense can ever be created because they were trying to fit so much into that, like, 2 hour and 20 minute time frame. And like I said, that extremely saturated color scheme was cool. But like, I remember being extremely scared of Tim Curry's It when I was a kid, like, traumatized by it, and of course, like, I don't know, maybe things don't affect me like that anymore. Like, I wasn't expecting it traumatized by that It movie, by Muschetti's It movie, but I just didn't find it very scary because I didn't really find that there was any suspense. There was just jump scares and scary looking CGI, effectively scary CGI. Dune is about patience. Prana Bindu, the slow knife, Kan Lee, concentration trance states. So patience there should be room to breathe. We should see characters having patience on a screen. I'm not talking about single shots that take half an hour or whatever. But I don't want to see these smash cuts between scenes that, where there's where there's all this exposition and stuff. I think that would be upsetting. So yeah, I don't want to see these 45-second Guy Ritchie rapid fire dialogue scenes. Where it makes it feel like Paul's objective is to heist this planet, for instance. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. At least we can be satisfied knowing that Akiva Goldsman is nowhere near this project, right? And I think it's Legendary Pictures. Obviously, they did amazing with their Batman movies, which almost kept getting better as they went along, right? But yeah, Goldsman's not involved. Alex Kurtzman's not involved, so we should be pretty safe. And Denis, if you see this, I think you're gonna do awesome. I'm just shit posting a vlog, for lack of a better term. Fortune passes everywhere.